Hey folks, Nick here from another Booktube channel. Today, asking the question, what type of reader are you? I was hanging out in Criminali's Discord the other day, which is something a very cool person would say. And this conversation kind of came up naturally of the type of reader you are. And from what I kind of pieced together from the conversation was that there's like three general types of readers. There are those who are driven by character. There are those who are driven by story or plot, and there are those who like a prose driven book. And I just think it's a really interesting topic of conversation because I think it says a lot about what people are looking for, what they're trying to get out of the reading experience. So I'm going to answer this question for myself, and then I would love to hear in the comments what type of reader you are and why you think that is. So I would definitely say when it comes to reading that I am almost entirely story and plot driven. Now, I don't think that it's not possible for you to completely ignore the other two options. Like, even with an amazing story or plot, I need to have some interest in the characters. I need to be able to read the book and enjoy the reading experience. So it's not like they have nothing to do with it, but I am willing to overlook like mediocre prose and bare minimum characters if the plot is really, really strong. And that's something that is, for me, interestingly enough, unique to books. It's quite different for movies, but I won't go into that right now. But when I think of a story or plot in a book, I think it explains why I gravitate towards horror and sci-fi and fantasy. These are typically high concept genres, genre fiction. They're not existing in our reality, and so the setting is unique, or the time and the place is unique, and that really speaks to me. That something like that, a really good, well-built world can hook me in faster than just like a really good character. It's part of the reason I think I like The Wheel of Time so much is because Robert Jordan's world is so massive and well thought out and just interestingly populated that the actual story of The Wheel of Time is okay to me, but the world that the characters inhabit is super interesting to me. And there have definitely been times where I've read books that are character driven that I've enjoyed greatly. Jane Eyre was one last year that I loved. Jane Eyre is very much wholly a character driven book, in my opinion. And I loved it. I was super hooked on that one. And I can think of one author that can hook me with his prose only, and that's Kurt Vonnegut. Because that's the kind of writer he is. Like, Kurt Vonnegut doesn't write hard science fiction books. His books are sci-fi in like the basest sense, in the bare minimum requirement to be considered sci-fi. And for his stories, he often tells you the ending of the story right in the very beginning. And the whole point of reading a book of his is reading about all of the coincidences that happen in people's lives to get to that ending. Like, that's really the draw of a Kurt Vonnegut book, and that's his prose. So his prose absolutely captures me like that, but it's really the only example I could think of. Other than that, I need a riveting plot or story to keep me reading a book. Right now I'm reading The 87th Precinct by Ed McBain, and there are good characters in that. And if you read enough of those, you definitely start to feel certain characters that you like more than others. But when you're reading just a single one of those books, the characters are almost secondary. To me, they definitely are secondary. It's just the incredible crime mystery. Like, the mystery at the center of it is always the driving force. And that's what I particularly look for, I think, in a reading experience. And I alluded to this earlier, but This is different for movies for me. That I am plot story driven for books, but for movies, plot and story, I don't care about at all. And I don't. I think the disconnect there is that when it comes to movies and TV shows, what I like most about that medium is the visual aspect. So the story that's being told isn't nearly as important to me as the way that the story is being told. I am interested in directors who have something to say with their vision, who are doing something with the material that is completely unique to them. Like them saying, only I could have told the story in this way. Like, this is my story because this is how I tell it. That's an aspect of filmmaking. That is the aspect of filmmaking that really draws my attention. I think one of the most common criticisms stories in general across any medium get is that, oh, the story wasn't super original. And I've always considered that to be a little bit of a hollow criticism, because every story's been told already. Like, really, when you consider how many movies and TV shows and books and comics and yada yada are published every year, probably hundreds of thousands a year, every story's been told already. What is different is how that story is told. And so to me, in movies, how that story is told is the director's vision. What images, what camera techniques are they using to tell that story? What editing techniques? How are they piecing it together visually? In books, it's, you could say the same thing. You know, every author has a different writing style. If you gave the same story outline to two different writers, you get two different products at the end. But the writing is a little bit less important to me with that type of experience. I prefer just a really tightly plotted story when it comes to writing, and I like to have it be in a high concept kind of package, which is why I gravitate towards genre fiction in reading, is because when you have horror and sci-fi and fantasy, it has to be unique. Like, you can take out an unoriginal story, put it in space, and now there's something that's a little bit original about it, a little bit unique about it. That's how I think I get around it with reading. I don't know if I'm being consistent with my arguments here. I just know that when I'm looking at the two mediums of writing and visual arts, what I value in each is very different. And I just want to talk briefly about comic books here, because I don't know how I forgot them when I first recorded. But it's very similar to movies for me, where the visual aspect is a lot more interesting to me than the story. And just to summarize, I'm going to paraphrase the great Todd McFarlane, one of the greatest 90s comic artists of all time. And I forget where he said this, but he said, if my mother wrote a comic book, but I drew it, you would still read it. But if I wrote a comic book and my mother drew it, then you would not read it. And I can't really argue with that. And oh my God, I just thought about something else that I had to cut in here. This is valid because it is a potential explanation as to why I value the visual nature of movies and comics. But when it comes to a reading experience, I just want the plot to move along and just like kind of push things through. And it's because I'm not a visual thinker. Like, like people say, like, picture a cube and like now rotate it in space. Like, I can't do that. I'm one of those people. I only think like textually. So when writers get really hung up in their prose, like describing the way that places and people look, I zone out. Like, I most characters, if they're described as like, like they're this tall, they have this hair color and this haircut, and they're wearing this, like, I ignore it. I imagine whatever I want to imagine, like whatever works for me to like just move on. Because I don't have that visual image in my head. It's all just like, it's just like buzzing. So that's why with books, I just need to move along. I need the plot to push along. Whereas in movies and comics, I have something to look at that I don't need to visualize it because it's there for me. So yeah, that's kind of interesting to think about, huh? So yeah, that's me. That's the type of reader that I am and viewer, I guess, since I talked about movies, I'm very curious to hear what you are interested in, what type of story drives you in reading, and is it different than when you're watching a movie or TV show? Are you looking for different things in those different mediums? Let me know. I'm very curious, and why that choice satisfies what you're trying to get out of being an audience member, if that makes sense. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.